Streaming now on CBS News Los Angeles, this is Primary Countdown. Tonight, how will they address the homeless crisis and rising crime rates? An open seat on the LA County Board of Supervisors from the Valley to Malibu to Hollywood, the contenders in the race for District 3. Plus, primaries held in 5 states, several defeats for candidates backed by former President Trump, plus mass shootings and the impact on the midterm elections. And one of the biggest and most expensive battles for a seat in Congress is right here in Southern California, why both parties have their sights set on that seat. Good evening, everybody. I'm Tom Waite. We are now just 2 weeks from the June primary, and one of the most important races this year is for an open seat on the LA County Board of Supervisors, open because of Supervisor Sheila Kuehl is retiring. It's the 3rd district, which includes the San Fernando Valley and runs along the coast from Malibu to Venice. It also includes all the West Side cities and neighborhoods going as far inland as Hollywood. Here's Lori Perez with a look at the issues and the candidates.
Rising crime. A homeless crisis that only gets worse while we spend even more each year to address it. A housing crisis, not enough apartments or homes for hundreds of thousands of people, the prices too high for everyone.
People really have nowhere to go.
Few places on earth have so many who have so much, living side by side with people who struggle to get by every day.
Stand up for justice. Stand up for justice.
And the growing number of voices calling for racial equality. It is a critical time for the people of LA County. What's happened to the quality of life here, many believe, is heartbreaking and unacceptable.
Because we need to fix LA. I'm really frustrated, frankly. I mean, I consider myself a progressive, but I'm outraged with what's happening in this town, and I think everybody else is too.
State Senator Henry Stern says he feels it too. That's why he's running for the LA County Board of Supervisors.
It's no surprise to us. Often, we'll see a headline, that Los Angeles is making headlines doing something that we did 6 months or a year prior. We're not waiting for anyone to come and save us. We're stepping up and doing the work.
West Hollywood council member and former mayor Lindsay Horvath says she's found some of the answers running that city, while State Senator Bob Hertzberg says politics is about character.
Do you tell the truth? Do you get it done? Do you work around the clock to make it happen? Do you show up in the community to show respect to voters and listen to them, even if you disagree? Right? Those are what's critical. None of that comes out in an election. The delta be the difference between the sales job and the governing job. That is night and day.
All right, for analysis on this race and other headlines from this week on the campaign trail, we bring in our panel of political experts. All right, joining me once again tonight, Fernando Guerra, political science professor at LMU, Loyola Law professor and political analyst Jessica Levinson, and veteran LA city and county leader Zev Yaroslavsky, now in the UCLA Luskin School of Public Affairs. And Zev, let's start with you, since you were county supervisor for a few years, maybe about 20 years in the 3rd district. So I think it's important we kind of start with you and talk about the survey you recently did with the University of California, Los Angeles, showing the quality of life in LA County is diminishing, and it's dipping, as your survey said, to the lowest level in 7 years. The survey revealed several factors behind the reduction in quality of life. According to the index, it was high prices, homelessness, rising crime, and health concerns. Those were some of the primary reasons. What do you think how do you think this will play in the county supervisor's race?
Well, I think it'll play in all the races, county supervisor, mayor, council races. People are not happy. People are anxious. They're scared in some cases. There's a higher concern and anxiety about crime, especially violent crime in certain parts of the region. There's a growing concern about inflation. Inflation really got going just in the last few months. I think it's a curtain raiser on what will be a very powerful political issue, as we all know from past experience. And homelessness, of course, is a primary issue in this region. So I think what was interesting in our survey is that we have 9 categories that we ask people to rate their quality quality of life countywide, to rate their quality of life in. Usually some categories go up, some go down. This year, all of them went down, and they went down to the lowest ever in 7 years since we've been doing the survey. So it's an anxiety-ridden time.
And Jessica, what do you think in terms of how these candidates can break through and maybe zero in on some of these categories to connect with voters?
It's a big question, because I was looking at LA County and the Board of Supervisors, and why are people raising almost $1 million for the seat? And the answer is that LA County is bigger than almost 42 other states, or I believe 42 other states. There's I think, $39 billion budget. 10 million people live here. These are really, I feel, again, silly saying this in a box next to Zev Yaroslavsky, but these are really important positions. So how can somebody break through? There are three big candidates, two that are now in the California legislature, one a sitting city council person. They already have pretty established constituencies. And I don't know how you get that three to break out and either get new voters or try and go into the lane where there's already somebody who's probably the favorite.
And Professor Guerra, we see already that, for example, Horvath has the LA Times endorsement. Mm-hmm. Is that something that could help her break through? Or, like, as Professor Levinson was saying, we already see these two other very established candidates as well?
No, I think it definitely helps you. I mean, even though the LA Times has declined in circulation, it's still the #1 newspaper in the region. It still goes to hundreds of thousands of people, especially people who read or register to vote. So I would much rather have it. It's almost like a contribution, because it's a mailer. They talked about her in terms of when they endorsed her, and then right before the election, they'll send out another edition saying who they've endorsed. Very important, very significant.
And when we look forward at this race, is it going to come down to name recognition? I mean, like, I think, as you said, Zev and Professor Levinson, you talked about this too. We have established candidates, but how do they break through?
Well, I think it's all in the campaign, right? The campaigns cost money. There's a lot of money being spent on that election. The three candidates there are State Senators Bob Hertzberg and Henry Stern. They both represent the San Fernando Valley. Bob, the eastern half, Henry, the western half. And Lindsay Horvath is a councilwoman in the city of West Hollywood, former mayor of West Hollywood. The district is a little more of a valley district than it was before redistricting, but not by much. So, 50-48. And it's all going to be in who catches on, who gets traction with the voters. And, it's an unpredictable race.
Professor Levinson, when we look at a supervisor's seat like this, what kind of power do they have to really influence, say, the sheriff or policy that could impact the homeless crisis?
I think an enormous amount. I mean, we have seen that there are very difficult problems, and obviously they can't act alone. So there are 5 supervisors. And we also know that the county has to work with the city. The county also has to work with the state. Now, I think when you asked a really good question with respect to the sheriff, a lot of that will depend on who the next sheriff is. Our current sheriff, Sheriff Villanueva, has had a very contentious relationship with the Board of Supervisors. So how much kind of traction they get with the sheriff's department, I think, will depend on who's leading that particular department. The same thing with respect to homelessness. Some of this is going to depend on who the next mayor is and how well the city and the county work together. The county has a huge budget, lots of resources, but also really serious problems that they can't tackle alone. So there's a lot of power there, also a lot of hurdles.
And Professor Guerra, same question for you about just how important this seat is and the kind of power it will have.
Yeah, I think, try not to repeat what was already said, incredibly powerful. It is the most powerful local legislative body in America by far. A member of Congress gave up her seat to run for that. A state legislator, Holly Mitchell, gave up her seat to run for this. A former member of a presidential cabinet is also on there. Incredibly powerful. No other place in America would a member of Congress, a state legislator, give up a position to run for a local legislative office. Only in Los Angeles County. The career path of elected officials themselves tells you how powerful it is.
All right, let's do kind of a lightning round here because we're running out of time, and start with you, Zev. Where do we stand in terms of the LA mayor's race? It's now kind of come down to a top 3. De Leon, Caruso, and Bass. How do you see this shaking out at this point?
Well, I think I think those are the three major names. I think it's going to come down probably to Caruso and Bass. I wouldn't rule out De Leon at this point, but so far he hasn't moved. I think the Caruso campaign is trying to win this thing in the primary because in the general, it'll be a considerably higher turnout, which will change the demographic of the electorate, probably not to his favor. But I think he's been surging and ascending, let me put it that way, since he started spending his money, and he's spent a lot of money. He's spent close to $30 million so far.
Professor Levinson?
I agree with that. I think that the only place where Rick Caruso, where that surge, where that momentum, as we've talked about, did, I think, hit a snag is the day that the Dobbs opinion, the opinion where the Supreme Court will overturn Roe v. Wade, when that opinion came out, and then there was a trickle of ads by Bass and surrogates, which indicated that he supported Republican candidates who were pro-life, Republican causes. Now, again, the mayor does not have direct control over this particular issue, but I do think it plays in the minds of certain voters, and it's a very, very important issue for them.
And Professor Guerra, let's wrap it up with you.
Yes, Kevin De Leon, council member, still has a path, but it's more likely that it's Bass and Caruso. Caruso is surging or ascending, as Sev said, spending $25 million, you better. And then I think they've done polling with certain parameters that say they could win outright. I don't think so. I think their parameters and their polling suggest things that just aren't happening. The math isn't there. I don't think he can get 50%. However, if I'm Caruso, I'm going to try, because Sev is absolutely right. The dynamics change to Bass's advantage in the November. So if he could spend another $5 million and get it over with right now, why not? It will not happen, though. There will be a runoff, and we'll see them both in November.
The best minds in LA politics. Thanks to all of you so much for joining us. All right, 5 states held primaries this week, and there was a major defeat for a candidate backed by former President Trump. Results and analysis when we come right back. Welcome back, everybody. This is Primary Countdown. I'm Tom Waite. Let's get to some of the national headlines from this week. We are joined by CBS News political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns. Thanks so much, Caitlin, for joining us. Let's talk about Georgia from last night. It may have been one of the biggest defeats for former President Trump, with the situation between the current governor, Kemp, and one of his challengers. Talk to us a little bit about that.
That's exactly right. Well, incumbent Governor Brian Kemp was kind of enemy number one for former President Donald Trump. The reason why is simply because Kemp certified the election results in his state that showed that, of course, President Trump lost the election there. So he had really trained his ire on the current governor and endorsed a primary challenger to him, former Senator David Perdue. But as we saw last night, as the results showed, Kemp was able to go to a resounding victory in that state, and that gave us some more data points about the power of a Trump endorsement.
And the other big headline from Georgia was the Secretary of State, right, Raffensperger, who, of course, was the other public enemy number one for former President Trump, because he certified that vote or was part of the certification process. Former President Trump was supporting Heiss, right, another competitor to Raffensperger. Heiss also went down in defeat.
That's exactly right. And that was a race that we were watching very closely to see whether Raffensperger could not only pull ahead, but avoid a runoff. And he did. You have to get more than 50% of the vote in order to avoid a runoff. So he was able to win that primary outright. But Raffensperger was also a big target of the former president. Remember, in 2020, former President Trump, then President Trump, called Raffensperger and asked him to, quote, find me the votes, essentially looking for Raffensperger to invent votes to overturn the election. And of course, Raffensperger denied those attempts by the then president to overturn the election. And he really became a big target for Trump. So he endorsed Congressman Jody Heiss to run against Raffensperger, and he was unsuccessful. unsuccessful. So kind of taken together, these wins by Raffensperger and Kemp show there is some appetite, at least among those type of Republicans, to focus on moving on away from 2020. We saw Kemp on the campaign trail talk about things like inflation, the economy, how he said that he moved his state beyond the pandemic, and really drawing contrasts with Democrats. And so that's an interesting dynamic here to watch. Another dynamic that we were watching last night was this kind of proxy war between former President Trump and his vice president, Mike Pence. Mike Pence endorsed Kemp. Trump endorsed Perdue, and so we saw the results of that, and that raises some questions about what Pence's ambitions are, perhaps for a higher office.
And then, of course, we have the horrific shooting in Texas. How do you think this will play in terms of the gun control debate? And, you know, just in terms of the whole process, I mean, it's hard to even imagine it in terms of politics, but of course it does become political.
Exactly. And unfortunately, we have covered so many of these tragic shootings, these horrific shootings, including of children. I covered the aftermath of the Sandy Hook shooting, where lawmakers were trying to figure out legislation to respond. And even at that time, there was not enough support for something that seems as simple and kind of fundamental as expanding background checks. That did not pass muster in the U.S. Senate. And so we go through these kinds of similar cycles, unfortunately, where we have a mass shooting, there are questions about what Congress can do, and there's inaction by Congress. This, however, does feel a little bit different, at least at this point, because you have lawmakers at least trying to talk about ways to revive some of this legislation. You have Joe Manchin, Democrat from West Virginia, who worked on a background check bill with Senator Pat Toomey, a Pennsylvania senator, Republican, who is retiring. They are talking, they say, about potentially reviving that. But, you know, when you talk to lawmakers on Capitol Hill, they are kind of resigned to the idea that, unfortunately, after all of these mass shootings, that there is little appetite in Congress to actually work towards a solution. So we'll see what the public pressure points are, especially as new information comes out about this horrific tragedy, and we'll see if there could be movement on the Hill. However, we did hear from Democratic leader Chuck Schumer essentially saying this will be an issue determined by voters at the ballot box this November.
CBS News political correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you so much for your insight and analysis. We appreciate it. All right, thank you so much, and we will be right back with more Primary Countdown. And most expensive battles for a seat in Congress will be right here in Southern California. It's the new 27th district. Chris Holmstrom shows us why both Republicans and Democrats have their sights set on the seat.
It's one of the tightest races in the nation, the new 27th congressional district.
He broke records and piloted the F-18 Super Hornet.
Republican Mike Garcia is hoping to keep his seat after a narrow victory in 2020.
Last November, I lost the race for California's 25th congressional district by only 333 votes.
Democrat Christy Smith is his biggest challenger and is taking on the incumbent for the third time. The new district includes a little bit of the San Fernando Valley, a big chunk of the Antelope Valley, and Santa Clarita. The district is historically conservative, but has become more Democratic throughout the years. And after redistricting, none of Simi Valley is in the district, an area that is predominantly conservative. Campaign signs can be seen throughout the district, including front lawns. This household hopes the former Navy pilot turned politician keeps his spot.
We need to have representation that believes in the family, believes in a reasonable means for making a living.
And this